Welcome back. You're still with us here on SABC News. This, of course, Newsroom. Today we're talking about the sensitive topic of racism and race here in South Africa. The Institute for Justice and Reconciliation is a non-governmental organization and think tank forged out of the country's truth and reconciliation process in the year 2000. The aim was to ensure that lessons learned from South Africa's transition from apartheid to democracy were taken into account as the nation moved ahead. The main mission is now to keep reconciliation and social justice on South Africa and Africa's agenda. The Institute has earned international reputation for research of the highest quality, bold policy suggestions and in-depth reconciliation work on the ground. Now, in our Cape Town studios, we have the head of Department Building and Inclusive Society at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, Mr. Stan Henkeman. Stan, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Eben. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm sure you've watched most of the program so far. We're dealing with an issue that's constantly at the forefront of South Africans' minds. First, tell me, before we get into the work that you do, how do you view what has been going on in recent times?
Even it's actually quite interesting that we see recurrences of this kind of thing, and every time it happens, and this time in particular, it seems to, the backlash and the pushback seems to be stronger and stronger. In a way, one shouldn't be surprised. You know, we're in a democracy that is now in its 22nd year. But we're talking about mindsets. We're talking about institutionalized ways of looking and observing people that comes in this country in particular over hundreds of years. And so, you know, it's not surprising because these mindsets, the thinking of people in South Africa is so deeply entrenched, and in a way it has almost become part of the DNA of our society. And so it's not surprising, it is disconcerting. But I think one needs to understand it in that light. The second thing is that it's, you know, if you really think about it, because it gets the press coverage, because it's in the news, because social media takes hold of it, you know, it seems as if it is a pervasive, deep problem. But in essence, it is a group of people who really are in a minority. And I'd like to also say that in our research, in the South African Reconciliation Barometer, there is hope because, you know, more than 70% of South Africans say that they want a united South Africa. They want to be part of a united South Africa. And so it must be seen in context. The fact that it happens is disconcerting, and we have to deal with it, and perhaps we can talk a little bit about some of the things that could potentially be done.
Tell us a little bit about that, but I'm also interested, the Reconciliation Barometer, what are some of the other outstanding things that jumped out at you?
A number of things, Eben. One thing is that the barometer results show us, and this is research that was done in interviews with ordinary South Africans from all backgrounds across the country, and essentially what the research shows us is that you know, we still socially a deeply divided country. We socialize at work, we socialize in the education sector and so forth, but that's forced socialization because we have to be there. But when it comes to outside of these spaces, the results show us that South Africans by and large still socialize within their specific groups, and these groups are mainly racial groups. So that's the one thing. The other thing that the research does show us is that South Africans are saying to us that the biggest impediment, the biggest stumbling block to reconciliation is still the deep-rooted inequality in our country. And then maybe a third thing to mention is that the social interaction between people in higher income groups is much higher than people in lower income groups, and that's understandable. If you live in a township and informal settlements, your interaction with people of a different race is very limited, and often that interaction especially if it's in a workplace situation, is that of a master-slave relationship. And so essentially there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but the hope for me certainly is the fact that more than 70% of South Africans expressed the fact that they want to be part of a united South Africa. And in a way, one needs to look at that as well and see how do we then mobilize, how do we help the 70-odd% of South Africans of all races to realize this dream of being part of a united South Africa.
Why do we in South Africa give so much of the voice to the 20-odd% that are not interested in building this inclusive society?
If I knew the answer to that question, Eben, I probably would be a rich man. But I think there are a number of reasons. The one is that, if we say that 70-odd% want to be part of a united South Africa, that's a wish that's expressed.
Yeah.
That wish is not always manifested in everyday life. And so when people get into the media and they articulate these views, and my sense is that often these racist comments emanate from a position of fear. If you look at the incident at the court, my sense is that those white protesters generally were there out of fear. That's what drives them. Whereas people on the other side of the fence were there because they want to deal with this humiliation that comes from being exposed and being a victim and a target of racism. And so those overwhelming emotions are what drive people. And so even if you want to be part of United South Africa, when somebody talks about, oh, they're going to do this to us or they're going to do that to us, that fear kicks in. And I think that is why it gets so much attention. And so they are in a minority, but they articulate things in a way that stirs up fear, alternatively, that stirs up anger that stems from humiliation.
Stan, that question will make you a rich man in South Africa. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Nice, fantastic end to the first hour of our show. Stan Henkeman, I can tell you, he is the HOD of Building an Inclusive Society at the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation here in South Africa. Interesting to note, their research shows more than 70% of South Africans believe in the dream, want to make the dream happen. And that is the great hope that we have here in South Africa. Of course, there are other stories in the news. I can tell you that Cricket South Africa